The pen feels heavier than it should. You are standing in a marble hallway outside the east wing of the Cathedral of San Lorenzo, and somewhere beyond these walls, florists are still adjusting 3,000 white roses for a wedding that isn't yours. Not anymore. Not in an hour. Vincenzo Caruso stands across from you, flanked by his lawyer and two men who used to call you Signora with something close to respect. Nobody calls you that today. Sign it, he says. Not unkindly. Worse than that, bored. Like you're a formality between him and the rest of his life. You look at him the way you've learned to look at powerful men, steady, unreadable, giving them nothing to work with. 3 years of marriage sit between you like ash. You remember the wedding. You remember believing, for a while, that quiet meant safe. You know, he says, watching you hold the pen. I used to tell people I made a mistake marrying beneath myself. He lets that sit in the hallway, lets his lawyer hear it, lets the two men by the door hear it. You are the biggest mistake of my life. Nobody in the hallway moves. Somewhere behind the doors, a string quartet is tuning for a bride who isn't you. You could say something. You have 3 years of things you could say. Instead, you press the pen to the paper and sign your name, the name he gave you, the name you're about to give back, in a hand so steady the lawyer glances up. Was that supposed to hurt? You ask, and your voice doesn't shake at all. Vincenzo laughs, short, dismissive, already turning toward the mirror to check his tie. You are never worthy of carrying my family's name, he says. I hope whatever you do next, you do it quietly. It's what you're good at. You fold the papers. You don't cry. You don't raise your voice. You lean in close enough that only he can hear it, close enough that his lawyer will spend the rest of the day wondering what was said. I'll see you at the wedding, you whisper. Then you turn and you walk out of the hallway, out of the cathedral's east wing, out of his life, leaving Vincenzo Caruso standing very still, staring at a closed door, already wondering why those 5 words feel less like a goodbye and more like a warning. For years before that hallway, you are nobody. That's not an insult. It's a choice, one you make every single morning. You work the counter at a small import shop in Palermo's old quarter, the kind of place tourists wander into by accident and locals forget exists. You wear plain clothes. You keep your hair pulled back. You've perfected the art of being forgettable, a skill that takes more discipline than anyone realizes, because the world is always trying to notice something about you, and you've spent your whole life making sure it doesn't. Vincenzo Caruso walks in on a Tuesday, trailed by 2 men in suits that cost more than your shop makes in a month. He's not there for you. He's there for the owner, for a conversation about territory that has nothing to do with imported olive oil. But he sees you anyway. Maybe it's the way you don't flinch when his men fill the doorway. Maybe it's the way you keep counting the register, unbothered, while grown men who run this city go quiet in his presence. Whatever it is, he comes back the next week. And the week after that. He courts you the way ambitious men court things they don't yet understand. Persistently, possessively, mistaking your calm for emptiness, your silence for having nothing to say. You let him believe he found you, plucked you out of obscurity, gave you a life you never could have built yourself. There is one moment early on that you almost don't notice. An old man, silver-haired, dressed like money that doesn't need to announce itself, passes your table at a restaurant where Vincenzo has taken you to be seen. The old man's eyes land on you for exactly 1 second too long. He doesn't smile. He doesn't speak. He simply inclines his head, just slightly, the way you bow to someone whose name you're not yet permitted to say out loud. Vincenzo doesn't notice. He's too busy being watched himself, too busy performing importance for a room he thinks belongs to him. You notice. You always notice. You smile at the old man the way you'd smile at a stranger, and you tuck the moment away in the same place you keep everything else you're not ready to explain, the same place where a truth about who you really are has been sleeping for 26 years, waiting for the day it finally wakes up. Marriage to Vincenzo Caruso teaches you the particular loneliness of being seen every day and known by no one. At dinners, he introduces you the same way every time. This is my wife. Never your name first. Never a story attached to you, an accomplishment, a single detail that might make you a person instead of a possession. Just my wife. Like a watch he's wearing. Like proof of something rather than someone. You learn to smile through it. You learn to let the other wives, the ones with old family names stitched into their designer dresses, look at you with the polite pity reserved for a man's obvious downgrade. Vincenzo never corrects them. Once, at a dinner with a rival family, he even agrees with a joke about your modest beginnings, laughing along like it costs him nothing, not noticing that you've gone very still beside him. You let him believe the stillness is hurt. It isn't. It's restraint. Twice a year, you disappear. You tell him it's a sick aunt in Bologna, a cousin's business you're helping settle. Small, forgettable lies for a man who has never once asked a second question, because it has never once occurred to him that you might have a life beyond the one he's given you. He doesn't know that those trips take you north, through checkpoints that don't exist on any map, into rooms full of men who stand when you enter, the exact opposite of every room he's ever brought you into. He doesn't know that in those rooms, you are not just anyone's wife. You are the reason those men are still standing at all. He doesn't ask where the small, faded scar on your collarbone came from, the one you cover carefully every morning without thinking about it anymore. He's never curious enough to ask. That, more than anything, is what protects you. You pay a price for the silence, the small, cumulative price of being underestimated by the one person who's supposed to know you best. Some nights, alone while he entertains men more interested in his ambition than his company, you wonder what it would take for him to actually see you. You almost let yourself hope once. You bury that too. Because the secret was never really about protecting yourself from Vincenzo. It was about protecting him from a truth that, once it surfaced, would change everything, and not in the way anyone in that house could survive gracefully. The announcement comes on a Sunday, over dinner, delivered with all the emotion of a business memo. "I'm marrying Isabella Conti," Vincenzo says, not looking up from his plate. "The wedding's in 6 weeks." You set down your glass slowly. Isabella Conti, daughter of Don Conti, whose territory borders Vincenzo's like a fence he's spent a decade trying to move. A marriage like that isn't a romance. It's a merger. A crown stitched together out of two families who've spent years circling each other, deciding an alliance is safer than a war. "I see," you say. "You understand," he says, and it isn't a question. "This is bigger than us. Bigger than whatever this." He gestures at you, at the space between you, at 3 years reduced to a hand wave, has been. He tells you the divorce is a mercy. His actual word, mercy, as if releasing you back into a world he's convinced you were never equipped to survive is a gift. He tells you that you were never built for the kind of life he's stepping into, that Isabella understands power in ways you never bothered to learn, that you'll be happier somewhere smaller, somewhere quieter, somewhere that fits you. You could argue. You could remind him of everything you've absorbed silently for 3 years, every slight, every disappearance he never questioned, every ounce of restraint that has nothing to do with weakness, and everything to do with choice. Instead, you nod. "All right," you say simply. "If that's what you want." You watch something flicker across his face, not guilt, but confusion. A small crack in his certainty. He expected tears. He expected a fight, at minimum a wounded silence he could feel superior about. He did not expect ease. He doesn't know it yet, but that ease is the first mistake he's made in this entire conversation. The first sign, if he were paying any real attention, that the woman across the table isn't losing anything at all. You already know something Vincenzo Caruso doesn't. The wedding he's planning was never going to be his. By the time you reach the cathedral's east hallway, the guest list has already filled the pews, 300 of the most dangerous people in Italy, dressed like royalty, seated like a jury. Isabella Conti stands near the vestibule in a gown that costs more than the shop you used to work in could earn in a decade. She watches you sign the last of the papers with the particular smugness of a woman who believes she's already won something. She doesn't know yet that she's not the one Vincenzo should be worried about losing. "You should go," Vincenzo says, loud enough now that a few heads turn. He wants an audience for this. He's always wanted an audience. "Really? There's a door right there." You fold the papers calmly and slide them into your bag. You don't look at Isabella. You don't look at the small crowd of guests pretending not to watch. You look, briefly, at the far end of the hallway, where a cluster of older men in dark, unfashionable suits stand slightly apart from the rest, the way men do when they're not really guests, but witnesses. One of them, silver-haired, unreadable, meets your eyes for exactly 1 second. He doesn't smile. He simply, almost imperceptibly, nods. Nobody else in the hallway notices. Vincenzo is too busy enjoying his own performance to notice that 3 of the oldest, most feared dons in the country have gone very quiet, very still, the moment you walked in. "I hope you find someone who actually wants you," Vincenzo says, and Isabella laughs beside him, a small, cruel sound meant to be heard. You smile. Not the tight, polite smile you've worn for 3 years. Something looser. Something that unsettles the silver-haired man's companion enough that he leans over and murmurs something no one else can hear. "Thank you," you say to Vincenzo, "for the mercy." You turn and walk away, unbothered, spine straight, heels echoing down marble that suddenly feels less like an ending and more like a stage being set. Behind you, one of the old men in dark suits pulls out his phone and sends a single text message. 300 guests have no idea that somewhere in this cathedral, word is already spreading through the one family capable of silencing every other family in the room, and it has nothing to do with the wedding they came to watch. An hour later, the cathedral bells begin to ring. The nave is packed, every pew full, every powerful family in the country seated shoulder to shoulder in uneasy peace, the kind that only exists when everyone in the room is too afraid of everyone else to start anything. Vincenzo stands at the altar in a black tuxedo, jaw set, playing the part of a man in complete control of his own life. Isabella waits behind the cathedral's great doors, radiant, flanked by 6 bridesmaids, her father beaming beside her like he's already counting the territory this marriage will hand him. The organ swells. The doors begin to open. And then everything goes wrong in a way no one in that cathedral has words for. Because the woman standing in the doorway isn't Isabella Connie. It's you. You're wearing white, not a modest, forgettable white, but a gown that moves like something out of a different century, structured and severe and unmistakably regal, the kind of dress worn by women who don't ask to be seen. Your hair is down. Your spine is straight. Your face carries none of the calm restraint from this morning. Instead, something calm and certain and entirely new. For 3 full seconds, nobody in the cathedral breathes. Then somewhere near the front, an old man rises. It's the silver-haired man from the hallway. He stands slowly, deliberately, and every single person seated near him goes rigid because they know exactly who he is, and they have never, not once, not at a funeral, not at the christening of his own grandchildren, seen him stand for anyone. He doesn't just stand. He bows his head. One by one, like dominoes falling in the world's most dangerous room, the other dons rise to their feet. Chairs scrape marble. Silk rustles. Men who have ordered the deaths of other men without blinking now lower their eyes to the floor, hands over their hearts, a silence spreading through the cathedral like ice across water. Vincenzo stands frozen at the altar, his mouth slightly open, his mind refusing to process what his eyes are telling him. Isabella, forgotten behind the doors in her own wedding gown, begins to tremble. You walk down the aisle alone, unhurried, past 300 of the most powerful people in Italy bowing as you pass, toward a groom who is very clearly not Vincenzo Caruso, standing at the altar with the quiet, terrible patience of a man who has been waiting for years for this exact moment. And Vincenzo, watching the only woman he's ever called worthless walk toward a wedding that was never his to attend, finally understands. He was never the most powerful man in that cathedral. He was just the only one who didn't know it. Vincenzo has spent 15 years learning to read a room. It's the skill that built his empire, knowing who holds real power before they ever have to say it out loud. Today, that skill is the thing destroying him in real time. He watches the Marchetti family rise first. Old money, older grudges, a family that hasn't stood for anyone outside their own bloodline in 3 generations. Then the Russos. Then men from Naples, from Calabria, from families so insulated they rarely leave their own territory for anything short of a funeral or a war. They're all standing. They're all bowing. For you. Vincenzo's mind scrambles for an explanation that makes sense, cycling through everything he thinks he knows. A mistake. A trick of the light. Some elaborate joke arranged by a rival to humiliate him on the one day he can't afford it. Then he sees the silver-haired man. He knows this man's face. Everyone in this world does, even if they've never spoken to him directly. Don Alessandro Vitali, the patriarch. The name spoken only in careful rooms, attached to a family so old it predates most of the country's modern borders, so powerful that even Vincenzo's own mentor once told him, "Pray you never need something from the Vitalis, because if you do, you've already lost." Don Vitali has not bowed to another human being in 30 years. Not to presidents. Not to cardinals. Not at his own son's wedding, where he simply nodded once and sat back down. Right now, in front of 300 witnesses, Alessandro Vitali rises to his feet, presses a closed hand flat against his own chest, and lowers his head to you. Something inside Vincenzo's understanding of the world quietly breaks. He thinks of every room you ever stood in silently while he took credit for the silence. Every dinner where he let other men mock your modest beginnings while you said nothing. Every time you disappeared for weeks, and he never once thought to ask where, because it never occurred to him that your life might contain something larger than the one he'd built for you. He thinks of the scar on your collarbone he never asked about. He thinks of the old man at the restaurant, years ago, who inclined his head at you for 1 second too long, a moment Vincenzo dismissed so completely he'd forgotten it until right now, watching that same man bow before an entire cathedral. Every guest in that cathedral turns, one after another, to look at Vincenzo, not with sympathy, but with something closer to disbelief. They're not looking at him like a groom who lost a bride. They're looking at him like a man who spent 3 years standing next to the single most important person in the room and never once realized it. He was never the one holding power in that marriage. He was the only man in Italy who didn't know exactly who he'd married, and exactly who he'd just thrown away. To understand the woman walking down that aisle, you have to go back further than the import shop, further than Vincenzo, further than the version of yourself you built specifically to be forgotten. You were born Isabetta Vitali, sole grandchild of Alessandro Vitali, heir to a dynasty that has quietly controlled more territory across Europe than any family whose name gets spoken above a whisper. Your family didn't build its power through spectacle. It built it through invisibility, the kind of influence so deep and so old that most of the world doesn't know it exists, which is precisely how the Vitalis have survived for 6 generations while louder families burned out in a single one. You were 3 days old when your father was killed in a war your family never officially fought, a war fought entirely underground, over succession, over old debts, over the particular kind of hatred that only exists between people who used to be family. Your grandfather made a decision that night that would define the next 26 years of your life. The next Vitali heir would not be raised as one. You would not carry the name. You would not be photographed, seated at the right hand of power, or introduced at the gatherings where enemies could learn your face and plan around it. You would disappear in plain sight instead. You were raised across 3 countries under 3 different names, taught everything an heir needs to know: strategy, restraint, the anatomy of loyalty and betrayal, without ever once being allowed to look like you knew any of it. Twice a year, you return north under careful cover to sit in rooms with men who answered to your grandfather, learning the parts of the empire that could only be taught in person, memorizing a world you weren't yet permitted to claim. Marrying Vincenzo Caruso was never an accident. It was a test your grandfather arranged without telling you it was a test, an ambitious, mid-tier boss with real potential and real ugliness underneath it, placed in your path to see what you'd become under 3 years of quiet humiliation. Would you break? Would you reveal yourself the first time someone called you worthless? Or would you do exactly what a Vitali is trained to do, absorb it, catalog it, and wait? You waited. Not out of weakness. Out of design. Because the secrecy was never about hiding from the world. It was about surviving long enough to inherit it, and somewhere in that cathedral, watching Vincenzo's understanding of you collapse in real time, you understand something else too. The war that killed your father 26 years ago was never fully over. It simply went quiet, waiting for the exact moment you stopped being invisible, And that moment has just arrived, in front of every family capable of finishing what started the night you were born. Vincenzo finds his voice somewhere near the altar, though it comes out smaller than he intends. Isabella, he stops, correcting himself, as if the name itself is a weapon he's not sure he's allowed to hold. I didn't know. Nobody told me. If I had known who you... That's the problem, you say, and your voice carries easily through a cathedral gone utterly silent. You never ask. He opens his mouth again, already reaching for the next excuse, the next angle a man like him always keeps in reserve. We can fix this. Whatever happened this morning, whatever I said. You called me your biggest mistake, you say quietly, in front of witnesses. You told me I was never worthy of your name. You let the words settle over the room, over Isabella frozen near the doors, over 300 people who will repeat this story for years. You were almost right. I was never worthy of your name. You paused just long enough. You were never worthy of mine. Somewhere behind you, Don Vitali finally moves, unhurried, the way men move when they've never once needed to rush toward a threat. He crosses to stand at your shoulder, and the temperature of the room drops with him. Vincenzo, the old man says, and it's the first time he's spoken since entering the cathedral. His voice is calm, almost gentle, which is somehow worse than shouting. You humiliated my granddaughter in a hallway this morning, in front of guests, believing she had no one to answer to. He lets that land. I want you to sit with how close you came to finding out otherwise. It isn't a threat. It doesn't need to be one. Every family in that cathedral understands exactly what those words mean, and several of them quietly, instinctively, put a little more distance between themselves and Vincenzo Caruso. Near the doors, Isabella Conti has already stopped watching her almost husband. She's watching her father instead, who has gone pale, already calculating how fast his family needs to distance itself from a man who just insulted the heir of the Vitali dynasty on the morning of his own wedding. Without a word, without a scene, Isabella turns and walks back through the cathedral doors, her father trailing after her. The alliance dissolved before it ever had the chance to exist. Vincenzo is left standing alone at an altar built for a wedding that was never his, in a room full of men reevaluating whether he's worth the trouble of destroying or simply worth ignoring into irrelevance. What happens now? He finally asks, and for the first time in his life, he sounds genuinely afraid of the answer. You almost smile. Nothing happens to you today, you say. That's not mercy, Vincenzo. That's patience. You taught me the difference yourself. You just never noticed you were doing it. You turn from him, and the entire cathedral turns with you, because the room already understands something Vincenzo is only beginning to grasp. The consequence was never going to be a bullet, or a war, or anything loud enough to satisfy him. The consequence is that he will spend the rest of his life irrelevant to the only family that ever mattered, forgotten by the very world he spent his whole life trying to impress. 6 months later, the name Isabella Vitali is spoken carefully in every family across Europe, not with fear exactly, though there's plenty of that, but with the particular respect reserved for someone who was underestimated once and made absolutely certain it would never happen again. You don't run your grandfather's empire the way Vincenzo ran his, with noise, with spectacle, with cruelty dressed up as strength. You run it the way you survived 26 years of invisibility, quietly, precisely, 3 moves ahead of anyone still catching up to who you actually are. The old dons who bowed that day in the cathedral don't regret it. If anything, the ones who hesitated are the ones who spend the following months proving their loyalty twice as hard, aware that the new head of the Vitali family remembers exactly who stood immediately and who waited to see which way the room would move first. Vincenzo Caruso keeps his territory. Nobody takes it from him. That was never the plan. But invitations stop arriving. Alliances quietly dissolve. The rival families who once feared his ambition simply stop noticing him, which turns out to be a far crueler fate than any war could have been. He spends the rest of his career as a footnote in a story that was never really about him at all. As for you, you rebuild the parts of yourself that 3 years of smallness asked you to hide. You stop disappearing twice a year because there's nothing left to disappear for. You stop lowering your voice in rooms full of powerful men because you are undeniably the most powerful person in every room you enter now. Sometimes, late at night, you think about the girl behind the counter of that import shop in Palermo, quiet, watchful, deliberately unremarkable, and you understand something that took you 26 years and one cruel divorce to fully learn. Being underestimated was never a wound. It was the sharpest weapon you had, right up until the moment you didn't need it anymore. So, here's the question I'll leave you with. If you'd been sitting in that cathedral, if you'd known the truth before the doors even opened, before the groom did, before the bride he chose ever got the chance to tremble, would you have stayed silent and let the moment unfold exactly as it did? Or would you have warned him,